The following program is being presented to you by a community producer. The statements, views, and opinions expressed are not necessarily those of ALC TV or the City of Avon Lake.
Welcome to Common Sense. Common Sense is a program that's a series of shows that feature interviews with interesting people in our area, and will help us to learn who these folks are, what they do, and what makes sense to them and what doesn't, in a clear, concise and direct way. I'm Rudy Breglia, and today I'll be interviewing Tim Connors, the Executive Director of the Lorain County Young Republicans. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rudy.
Okay, well, why don't you start us off, Tim, and tell us some background information, where you were born, where you lived, how you've come to Lorain County?
Well, that's a long and complicated story. I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1990.
Okay.
And in roughly the same time I was born, my father was arrested for murder.
Okay.
So he was incarcerated before I was 1. So right after I got born, my father's imprisoned.
I see.
My mom was 16 as well, which makes things a little complicated. But they dropped the case, and he was in our lives until I was about 1 year old. And then they brought the charges back to him again, and then convicted him with fictitious evidence.
Okay.
We're still fighting that in federal court, and it's 30 years later. So
I see.
It's been a challenge. But my mom was 16, and she did what she had to do. She worked, she got jobs. I'm glad I didn't get aborted. That was a recommendation from some family members. So we made it through.
That too.
Right? Yeah, me too, especially me. So we did what we had to do. I mean, she did what she could to take care of me when I was younger. My stepfather came into our lives when I was about 5, and he moved us into a nicer neighborhood in the Las Vegas area, and I got to go to school in a nicer part of town. So I got to go to some of the nicer public schools in the Las Vegas area. It's not saying much. If I could trade my education, I would take the Avon Lake school system over the Clark County school system 10 times out of 10.
Okay.
So that's how that worked. They lost everything in 2008 when the financial collapse happened.
Understand.
Their home's value got cut in half. Everything fell apart. My stepdad lost his job. So they ended up packing up and deciding to move to Ohio, where my stepdad was originally from.
Okay.
I had just turned 18. I didn't know where else to do, so I just went with him. We got to Columbus. It was weird, strange. I didn't have any friends. I didn't understand the culture. But I started going to school at Columbus State and studying philosophy. Got my first job in aircraft component maintenance down by the airport out there in Columbus.
Okay.
And we were down there for about 18 months. And then my stepdad had like a strange midlife crisis and decided he wanted to move to Cleveland and go back to Avon Lake, where he was from. So originally, he moved 1 street down from his birthplace home on Cherry Lane.
Wow.
So it was interesting. I didn't follow them though. I tried to stick it out in Columbus. Had an opportunity in New York City come up. Decided I was just going to go for it.
Okay.
Moved to New York City. I was there for maybe 6 months before folks don't move to New York City. It's a bad idea.
Yeah.
It's a very bad idea. So I realized that when I was there. I was staying with my fiance and her family. And so it was just difficult. I got a job offer in Cleveland not that longer after that. I took it and I came out here. Again, it was aircraft component maintenance. So in that field, you're fixing airplane parts. So you kind of have to move to where the work is, because sometimes a company loses a contract and another company gains it. Well, the company I was working for in Cleveland was competing for a contract for a particular kind of part that I was a specialist at.
I got you.
They failed to achieve that contract. They lost it to a Canadian company, and I lost my job 2 months in. So it went from moving around a whole bunch of times, trying to figure it out, to having nothing. That was also during the Obama economy. We're talking about 2011, 2012.
Okay.
I spent most of 2012 unemployed, looking for work that paid the same or in the same field, and it just didn't exist. So when they did the sequester in the January of 2013, that kind of forced me to take a look at my life and go, you know what, it doesn't matter if it's only $8 an hour and it's hard work. I'm going to go do it because I have to do something. And so I started doing temporary factory labor at wherever they would send me. Bounced around a while until I got landed at a company that decided to hire me. That was a plastics factory in Elyria. It was a good job. I got to do algebra every day. It was nice.
Okay.
I like math. So when we were doing all that, they decided to start shutting down the plant. Moved over and put me on another side of the factory, doing a job I wasn't familiar with. I got hurt really quickly, and ended up, I still have a back problem that I deal with today. But when that happened, the company wasn't telling us what was really going on. I came back to work a few weeks later, trying to go back to work, and they laid everybody off on that day, and then shut the factory down permanently. And the plant manager told me when I asked him privately, well, why is all this happening? He was like, well, you know how cheap Chinese plastic is? You know how much more expensive it is for us to sell bags than it is for someone to buy them from a Chinese company?
I gotcha.
And this is a company that had been sold multiple times, but the place had been there for 30 years. So the point being was that these Chinese companies were operating with newer machinery, cheaper labor, and we're over here. I mean, the labor standard, I still think we were pretty cheap, but the wage wasn't great, but it was hard work, but they were old machines. And so there was an amount of waste that was generated. There was always maintenance that needed to be taken care of. And the company decided that the several $1 million in work to do on their machines wasn't worth trying to compete with cheaper plastics. So I lost my job there, which was really awful because I had just gotten hurt. So it wasn't like I could go take another job in a field.
Yeah.
And that's when I decided, I'm just going to try sales. They don't have to lift heavy stuff, so let's try that. I was in the cell phone world for a while, learned about some of commission jobs the hard way, about like what companies will do to you if you don't pay attention to your own money, and decided that, if I'm going to do sales, I might as well do it in something that gives you a real paycheck and actually lets you interact with humans in a way that isn't, in my opinion, slimy. I think the cell phone business is a little slimy.
All right.
So I didn't like that. So I went into cars. Believe me, it sounds crazy, right? But I went to Mattia in Elyria, and when I had my job interview there, because I interviewed with several dealerships, they were the least slimy people I spoke to. So I accepted the job there. I worked there for over 2 years, and the only thing that caused me to leave really is I had the desire to open my own business and do my own thing.
Okay.
So I decided to take the skills I had acquired from the sales industry, and I was like, well, if I can sell a car, I can sure sell something I like. And I'm a nerd, so I was into things like Magic cards and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And Dungeons and Dragons and things like that. So I opened my store and I started, carrying those products. And it was a nice thing at first. The community, kind of embraced me right away. There was a lot of folks from the different areas of gaming that would come into the store and shop and play. But it wasn't long before things started to go downhill. I opened in 2016.
Okay.
And we all know what happened in November of 2016. Well, November of 2016, I was in my store with the news on, watching the election coverage as we played games with our friends. And when they announced Donald Trump's victory, I lost it. I celebrated. Me and my wife were, we were very, very happy.
Okay.
Well, I guess she was my fiance at the time. But we're very happy, and that apparently got around. And I was boycotted by Hillary Clinton activists that play a specific game. And in the month preceding that, I lost 1/3 of my company's revenue. So,
oh boy.
So it put us in this difficult financial position. That progressively got worse. There was a group of guys that would play some games that didn't like those folks that would still show up in shop. But over time, it got worse. You could see in society, the worse cancel culture started to get. The more the media started attacking Donald Trump, the more they were willing to attack regular people that just voted for him. So I was getting it from all sides, basically.
Had a direct impact on it.
Yes, very direct. I didn't want to publicize that because I wasn't trying to make the impact worse than it already was.
Understand.
So, and I had a couple of partners that I cared about that I was trying to, they were trying to help mitigate some of the fallout. That taught us some valuable lessons, though. It taught us how to make money when our market started to shrink. It taught us how to change our strategic purchasing patterns. it taught us a lot of things about it taught me how to manage my money better. So I can't say it was all bad. Sure, I'm not successful today like I'd like to be. I'm not a millionaire, but I've learned some valuable lessons, and I think that's worth something. So that was my experience in business, though.
All right, so that's kind of the steps that you've taken in business. What about in your being the executive director of Young Republicans? Could you tell us a little bit about how you got there?
Yeah. So you might know this. The Young Republicans have had a club in Lorain County several times.
Okay.
They've risen and dissipated and up and down over time. And there was a young lady that tried to start a Young Republicans Club in Lorain County in 2020.
Okay.
And I jumped in. I went to a couple of events with them. I was waiting for the organizational meeting. It never happened. It kind of seemed like a group of high school kids that weren't really all that interested. The young lady that was going to run it joined the Air Force, God bless her. So she went off and serving her country, but that left everything else to go to the wayside. So it dissipated. It never truly formed. And I talked to the chairman of the party, and he told me, he's like, you don't really need to start a Young Republicans thing. You're 30. Yes, we're not. This thing, Young Republicans, people think of high school kids. So I was okay with just continuing on. But then this young man named Greg Fanning showed up from Virginia, and he's only 18, and I think he just started his freshman year at Hillsdale College. But when he got here and moved to North Ridgeville, he wanted to join the local Young Republicans chapter. He was really excited about it. And then he was really upset when he found out there wasn't one. So he approached Chairman Arredondo. And I guess with his help, they had decided, yes, okay, well, you're 18, you're a young kid, you want to do Young Republicans group, that's on you. I think they even tried to make the effort like, hey, do you sure you don't just want to get involved with the Republican Party instead? But Greg was real adamant about making sure we have a Young Republicans group. And so he started calling people and networking and talking to party leaders, asking around for people that are younger. And he eventually managed to get in touch with me and my wife, Mike Duran, the county recorder, as well as a handful of other Young Republicans in the area, including Alexander Hageman. He's in the area. He was a White House intern during the Trump administration. So that was
okay.
It was a pretty diverse group of professionals, I think, because Greg started off his political time in high school in Virginia working for state house and state senate campaigns. So he's had several volunteer roles. I think one time he was a volunteer coordinator, and in his senior year of high school, he had a paid campaign role with a state house campaign.
Wow.
So he's not as green as he appears. He's our chairman. Yes, exactly, just young. He's our chairman, and then Alexander's our vice chairman. Mike Duran is on our executive committee. We've got Nick DeFrancisco as our secretary. He's currently running for city council in Kipton. And then my wife, Michelle, is our treasurer. So we have a full executive committee set up and ready to go. We have general members and executive members, but most of the time the meetings are a handful of general members and then the entire executive committee shows up. So it's one of those things. We're a pretty small group, like I said, because we're very new.
I'm going to take you back a step. What prompted you to become politically active and join the Republican Party? What was?
Well, I started off.
I think I have an idea, but go ahead.
I started off I registered to vote for the first time I was allowed to, which was 2010. And when I registered to vote, I decided I was going to register as a nonpartisan. And even though I had previously supported John McCain and I'd looked at, I voted straight Republican ticket in 2010 in Ohio, which I'm not exactly pleased about John Kasich, but, I voted those ways. I voted for Josh Mandel for treasurer. I went down that line and voted red all the way, but I registered nonpartisan. And it's because I never thought the Republican Party as a party apparatus had the spine or the will to accomplish any of the things that we needed them to accomplish as an organization. So I just looked at the candidates, and that's how I was kind of raised. In 2016, however, things were a little bit different. Donald Trump was running in the primary, and I was pretty supportive of either Donald Trump or Ted Cruz. And I had never voted in a primary, and it was when I learned Ohio's primaries were locked by party, and I was like, well, I'm a registered nonpartisan. That means I can't vote. I was like, well, I can't let that happen. I need to vote in this primary. So I showed up, and it was a game day decision at the box. I was going to make the decision whether to be Donald Trump or Ted Cruz. And so I registered as a Republican that day, and I marked my vote for Donald Trump in the primary. And that was it. I didn't look back. I was like, okay, I'm a Republican now. You know,
Okay.
Donald Trump's a Republican, so am I, because
right.
I kind of agree with what he's talking about, or at least some of it. You know, so I was very excited about his candidacy, and my wife was too. Several people in our community obviously were. He won on election night before they pulled some of those votes back in 2016. So it was exciting. That's why I got involved. I decided to do that. And then while Donald Trump was in office, I was happy as could be, right? Yes, finally, we have a president that actually cares about us. It's actually doing something for us. And it was constant attacks from the media, constant attacks from people in the streets, and random protests about he said something wrong. It was just mind-boggling a little bit. And when you go through it for all that time, and then you experience what I experienced in business in 2017, 2018, it makes you start to think. And you're like, well, hold on. Why isn't someone like my congressperson doing something about this? Why aren't they saying something about it? So I go, well, my congressperson's Marcy Kaptur. She's not going to say anything about me. Matter of fact, if I died, she probably wouldn't mind. She's that kind of lady. You know, she denied a young man entry into West Point because he had pro-Donald Trump messages on his social media. That's real. You know, if you want to get into some of these higher-end, that's what I learned working with Rob, is to get into those higher-end military schools, you have to get approval from a state, a congressman or a senator.
Yep.
And when you have to go to your congressperson and it's Marcy Kaptur and you're a Republican, it's over. So all that money your parents spent on private school and all the work that you did as a kid to get the accolades and the notoriety that you did to get qualified to go to these schools, and you're arbitrarily shut down because of who you and your parents support politically. I think that's wrong. And I thought that was wrong while it was happening, and I didn't decide to run for any office. I was just getting real angry. But then they tried to impeach Donald Trump. And when they tried to impeach him, it was all about this Ukraine phone call. So I listened to it. I followed it really well. I followed the Russia thing real in depth, and understood the entire time it was bogus. The same thing with the Ukraine call. So I looked at this and I was like, well, Congress has the power to impeach, but they don't have the power to impeach arbitrarily. They're not allowed to do that. That's unconstitutional. So what I looked at is the Congress was abusing its authority as our elected body by using its impeachment power in an arbitrary nature. As far as I look at that, the country's gone. We no longer have a government that serves the people. We have a government that serves over the people. That doesn't sit well with me at all. So I decided I was going to do something about it. And I started planning a run in 2019. I went out and got my petitions signed. I had never been involved in the Republican Party. I had never really done anything with any of the folks out here. I just decided I had a message and I was going to throw my name on the ballot and see what happens. Of course, there was 4 of us on the ballot, and Mr. Reber was able to spend $30,000 in the primary. None of us were able to spend even $1,000 in the primary. It was just a bunch of other guys with a message. So Rob pulled away. He won resoundingly on Election Day. So we had a lowest turnout, I think, in Ohio history for a Republican primary in our district. But he still won like 60% of the vote, which is resounding. So he takes the victory there. And then we go into the season. I had already been talking with David Arredondo quite often. I had already been in contact with several party people in the city of Avon Lake and in the general region. I had traveled all the way to Lucas County to meet with the chairman of their party. I had traveled all the way into Cuyahoga County to meet with their steering committee in downtown Cleveland. So I had already met with all these people. I had already spoken at all these functions, and I got 2,000 votes in that primary. I didn't spend money on advertising. I didn't have any yard signs. I just gave a speech at a handful of venues, and 2,000 people answered and voted for me, which I thought was nice.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
that shows that going out and doing the work and not just spending the money actually does produce something. It doesn't produce a zero. So that taught me a valuable lesson. I immediately was like, okay, I'm going to try and jump into some business stuff again, and I was trying to sell some things online. That was when I was contacted by the party. And David Arredondo reached out to me. He's like, hey, you built your own website for your campaign, right? And I did. I had built my own congressional campaign site. And he said, well, I like the way that looked. Do you think you could do something like that for the party?
I see.
And I was like, absolutely. So we negotiated terms and a rate, and they did compensate me, and I redid the entire website from scratch. So new domain name, new everything, new accounts, new everything. So I built all that from scratch for them. They gave, we pieced together the digital media materials, like the pictures of people and candidates and folks in the party. And I put all the information up there and made it all good and fine so that voters could really use it. That's kind of what David wanted too. Is the whole point of us redoing that website was that voters that want to vote in a local election or even in a statewide election that don't necessarily understand the candidates all that well, or they're not sure who to vote for, they can go, or where to vote. They can go to our website and we can navigate them to the Board of Elections or to where their polling precinct is and give them profiles on potential candidates for office.
Facilitate things for voters.
Yes, we also keep a regular calendar of events up so that the public understands when the Republican clubs are meeting, when the committees are meeting. And I also operate their MailChimp account. It's just to send emails and things like that, so that they use that occasionally for fundraising or for announcements like Lincoln Day.
Okay.
So I do little things for the party here and there, and I just kept doing that until I decided to reopen my store, which was this year, actually. It's same as the executive director for Lorain County Young Republicans. That happened in May. So when Greg finally got all those folks together for an organizational meeting, we came in, and I actually wasn't planning on being on the committee at all. We just wanted to see what it was about. And everybody was talking, and I kind of stopped, and I was like, listen, guys, what are you guys here to do? Because there's a lot of things that this could be, and you guys are kind of deciding what that is now. And Greg, to his credit, he said, I want this to be an effective organization of Republicans under the age of 40 that help us win elections. And Mike Duran was, hallelujah. He's like, absolutely, that sounds like a great plan. And my personal thing is, I was never in a Young Republican club before this because I'm not into clubs. I'm not really interested in going to have drinks with people or making new friends. I can do that on my own, right?
Okay.
I don't need help with that. So I talked to these guys, and we all agreed this isn't just some group of guys that wants to hang out and make friends. We're not looking for new people that are trying to have a beer. We're looking for people that want to be effective in changing hearts and minds on the ground. We're looking for people that want to help win elections. So after that organizational meeting, and we passed everything, we did everything we needed to do, appointed our officers, we then began talking. And after about 2 weeks of me talking to Mike Duran and Greg and some of the other, like Alex, and letting them know, hey, this is what a club is defined as. This is what we are. That's not the same thing. So I did some digging on the FEC's website, and I found out what the organization that we were forming was a traditional PAC, the Political Action Committee.
Okay.
It's a group of people combining their political voices to make a difference in elections. So that's what a PAC is, and so that's what we were. But we didn't have bylaws for that. We didn't have the paperwork filed for that. So I talked to them over, and we all agreed unanimously that we would move forward, not as a club, but as a political action committee. So I took the time to rewrite our bylaws so that we are a PAC, make them in line with what we need to be. And then we also went ahead and we filed all the paperwork at the County Board of Elections to open a committee. We opened a bank account. We got everything set in stone. The only thing that we're not yet is we're not registered with the FEC. You're not required. You don't register with the FEC until you raise a certain dollar amount. So
Okay.
we haven't eclipsed that amount yet. So we're still, as soon as that happens, we have 10 days to file with the FEC. So, but I just want to point out the reason we did that is to avoid what happened to the Young Democrats from happening to us. So most people don't know this, but the Young Democrats aren't really a thing in Lorain County. They don't really exist. They have an organization. They have a committee on file. They have no members. There is no leadership. There's nothing. The last time they met, everybody in the room was over the age of 65. So, and it was folks like Sharon Sweda, a former commissioner, disgraced, disgraced former commissioner. So those are the folks that are at the Young Democrats. The one thing I'd point out is the Young Democrats are well funded. They have thousands of dollars in their account, and they are currently looking for a Young Democrat to take up the organization so that someone exists as a Young Democrat. We don't want that. We don't want a handful of our members to fall off the group because a bunch of the older members of the party are coming in and telling us how things need to be done. We don't want the older members of the party coming in with a check and saying this is how you have to spend this money. We're not looking for that. We're not looking to cultivate free volunteers for random political campaigns that the party tells us to deal with. We're not here for the state. We're not even here for the state Young Republicans. We are here for Lorain County. And so we formed ourselves as a PAC that's non-connected with any entity.
You're independent.
Yes. So, but we are Republicans.
Right.
So
Understand.
it's a complicated arrangement. But we did it so that we would have that total lateral control over what the voices in our group have to say. So if we have a vote and the majority of us says one thing, there's not 7 other people in the room that aren't really supposed to be there telling us how to do things. So, I mean, the way I personally did that in our bylaws is that we made it so that our honorary members, which are all members over 40, believe it or not, you can be a Young Republican at 70. You just can't vote on important issues. You're allowed to come to the meetings and go to all the functions. There's no dues. It's completely free. All our meetings are open to the public. We haven't necessarily advertised that because we are still new. Most of what we're doing is logistics. Our officers are still figuring out what their responsibilities are. It's brand new. So, like the secretary, he's still trying to figure out what the proper format for keeping minutes is. We're working on it. We haven't filed our first financial report yet, but one of the young men, Jason from the Board of Elections, is an integral member of our group. I mean, he is there he's at all the meetings, and he's one of the most knowledgeable people at the table every time. So when he's in there and he can help us with information and tell us things, I mean, he can't tell us non-public information, but he can tell us, hey, you have to make a records request. And then we know what to do now. So instead of having no guidance or nothing to figure out, we've got someone there. And he's going to be working in the finance department, so he knows exactly how the financial reports are supposed to be filled out. Okay. So when Michelle goes to file her first report, we have someone on hand that can help us work through the report and make sure everything is accurate.
Okay.
So we're new. We're very, very new. I hate to stress that, but we are trying to figure out exactly how to be effective in this county. I would say that for this year, it's the school board races. I mean, we did our endorsements last week. They're going to be announced probably this weekend, but we endorsed all of the Republican school board candidates, and there's 8 of them, believe it or not. We had to do some scouring. One of them is a write-in candidate in Elyria. Okay. So there's quite a few of those folks. Obviously, there's dozens of city council candidates. We made the decision that we can't just put ourselves everywhere all the time, but we can focus on the school boards. And we think that the school board issue is much more important than the city council issues right now. Okay. So we're focusing our attentions there. Like for instance, I've been helping out with Al Shiaza's campaign a little bit.
Okay, in Avon Lake.
Yes, yeah, and I mean Al's great. He doesn't really need that much help, so I just give him a little bit of advice. We'll see if he takes it or not. It's up to him. I don't work for him or anything. I'm just being nice. I'm just trying to help. So that's the same thing with we're trying to help out in Avon, and we're going to try and help out in Sheffield Lake. Got Jim Filata and Mike Palmer running together out there on this. They're putting their names on the same yard signs. Okay. It's really great. A lot of people are learning the lesson of run together because of the Dave Moore Michelle Hung victory, where they ran together and they both won. Seems like a lot of folks are now trying to piggyback on that idea, which I hope is successful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, you kind of got ahead of me a little bit. No, that's fine. But could you give us some details about your organization right now? Number of members, activities that you're involved in?
So the Young Republicans started out at 10 members in May of 2021. And since then, I think we're around 22, 25 now. The meetings aren't huge. We have 20, 25 members, but they don't all show up. Most of our members are college students that are studying away from home, so they can only come to 1 or 2 meetings a year, here and there. We've got the core group of attendees, and we have a group Discord, so sometimes we have people video call in through an app, and they'll attend the meeting that way, so they'll have some electronic attendance and some physical attendance, because Greg's in Hillsdale in Michigan, so he has to phone in to chair the meetings. So it's about a core group of 7 to 8 of us that always show up. We've had about 10 different people come in to meetings.
Mm-hmm.
We do get some folks from the community showing up. At our endorsements meeting, we had a new Young Republican showing up just to observe. We had Andrew McDonald there. Jeff Baxter in Elyria was there. And then before that, the meeting we had before then, we've had Chairman Arredondo there. Don Killinger, who's a big volunteer in Lorain, has been to our meetings before. So we've had a handful of people attend, maybe not necessarily in earnest, but just to observe and see what we're about. And I think the general consensus is that we're all about business. We tried doing meetings in restaurants. It wasn't very fun. So we went back to Republican HQ, where it's quiet. There's a board table, and we sit around the table like a board, and we make decisions. We have arguments. We discuss things. So it's not like we announce, okay, should we endorse this Republican for office because they're a Republican? We say, should we endorse this Republican for office? What are they doing to win their race? Are they knocking doors? Are they spending money? Who are they? Were they registered to vote as a Democrat a year ago? What's the story? Why do they identify as a Republican? How long have they been a Republican? And why are they running for office? Those things matter. And those questions don't always get asked of city council candidates and school board candidates. So,
Understand.
So we decided to put some extra research and extra emphasis on our endorsements process because it's our first one. It's our first announcements that we're ever going to make. So we did a lot of diligence there. If it wasn't for Jeff Baxter and Andrew McDonald being in the room, it would have been a lot harder because they helped us out a lot with some information. When we're having dialogue and discussion, sure, the other parties aren't necessarily involved, but we might stop and say, hey Jeff, do you know such and such out in Elyria? What can you tell us about that guy? So because not everybody answers the phone, not everybody has a phone number you can get right away. Researching the list of candidates was hard enough with the number of nonpartisan races. So, because we go above and beyond what the party does. The Republican Party of Lorain County stays out of nonpartisan races. We don't. We know that there's really no such thing. So there's a lot of places that claim to be nonpartisan, but they're all registered as something, a Republican or a Democrat. You check their personal registrations and you're like, oh, well, these are Republicans and these are Democrats. And
I see.
so
I see.
we did endorse an independent, which personally I had reservations about. But Mr. Andrew Lippian in Elyria, he's not really an independent. He's a Republican. But the rules screwed around with him because he's a reserve, he's National Guard. So he had to go and do his thing for the military and wasn't able to get on the ballot as a Republican in time.
I gotcha.
And had to file as an independent.
A technicality.
Exactly. So we think he's a very strong conservative. So we endorsed him in Elyria. But a lot of people in Elyria, actually. So that's the thing. There's a lot of important races coming up this year. And I kind of regret that we didn't do this sooner. I would have rather started this in 2020, back when we tried the original organization, so that we had more time to develop, to figure things out, and to fundraise so that we could actually impact a lot of these races. Because that's what we want to do. Yeah, that's what we're here to do. If we wouldn't exist if the Lorain County Republican Party was doing more, for instance. So we don't have any gripes with the party, right? David Arredondo is a friend of mine. I like the work that they're doing. They obviously have been making progress, getting Republicans elected in the county, but they haven't helped any city council candidates. They haven't really helped any school board candidates. Most of the conversation is about the 2022 races, which understandably, that's a lot of our conversation as well. But what are they going to do for the 2022 races? They might send out a strip ticket. They might write some checks to a handful of candidates, and that's going to be about it. That's going to be the extent of our efforts to win elections in 2022. I know not everybody in the party agrees with that, and I'm not officially a member. I'm not a voting member of any committee with the Republican Party. I may be on the steering committee as an advisor. I might get invited to different events to give a report to the joint committees, but I'm not a voting member. So I can't get up and say, hey, I think you guys should do X, Y, and Z to be more effective in an election. All I can do is take those concerns privately to the leaders. And there's only so much they can do with that. That don't necessarily, it's something they've never really done or gotten involved in, it's going to be kind of hard for them to jump into it. So that was what me and Greg come in. We've discussed it, and because we're a political action committee, we're not limited by what the party's limited by. There's no dollar amount that someone can write us a check. So you can't write the party you say write them a $15,000 check, they can't take it. Right? They can only take 14. The same thing with a congressional candidate. You can only write them a $2,800 check. That's the most money you can give a congressional candidate. And frequency matters too. These numbers are per election cycle. So with a PAC, PACs have no frequency limitation and no value limitation on contributions, which means there is literally no limit to the amount of money we are allowed to raise legally. And then the other this is where it gets important for us, is there's a term called independent expenditure with political committees. And what that means is you are spending money to influence an election, like say with advertising or yard signs or mailers or any of the typical campaign activities that a campaign would undergo. We can do those on the behalf of campaigns so long as we aren't coordinating with them. That's the law.
I gotcha.
So that's kind of what we're here to do. We do want to develop a door knocking crew, and I might be out at one point or another, but I'm very busy. It's very hard for me to get out there and do the door knocking unless I'm like running for something. And the same thing with a lot of our guys, like Greg's in Michigan. He's at Hillsdale. It's not like he's going to go door knocking for some Lorain candidates. So it gets difficult for us to do that, but we are trying to figure out a system. I know Andrew's got a door knocking event, I think, Andrew McDonald. He's got a door knocking event, I think, in the end of October. We're going to try and see if we can bring a couple of people there.
He's a candidate for Avon Council, right?
Correct, yeah. He's at one of the ward seats. So, and we did endorse Andrew as well. Speaking of which, the state Young Republicans already endorsed Andrew, which we thought was interesting because we were doing our research. We were like, oh, we don't really need to talk to Andrew. We all know Andrew personally. So we've known him for about a year. I've known him since I started running for office last year. So great guy. Why you couldn't have a better candidate in the Avon Council race. So we didn't really need to make a phone call and interview him. We understood who he was and what his campaign was about. And we understand he wants to help solve the traffic issues in Avon, which is a big deal to a lot of folks in Avon. So we really like him. But the state group had called him and done a full interview, and they got his headshot and did a whole thing. We were like, oh, our announcement's coming next week. What's this? So it was. So
they jumped the gun.
They jumped the. Well, they're looking at prominent high-level candidates to endorse. So their job is to endorse winners and people that are friends with Mike DeWine. So those are that's their job. Our job is to endorse the people that we think are deserving. So just because you don't have enough money in your campaign to really do a whole lot doesn't mean you're not going to go knock a lot of doors and make a lot of phone calls. So that we don't want to gauge who we're going to support just based on those key factors, like how much have you fundraised, is your platform complete, do you have a website? There's a lot of folks that don't have all those things that are still worthy to serve in the offices they're running for. So we want to make sure to help pull them up. Granted, we have a focus on Republicans under the age of 40. But you don't have a ton of those running. I think you pointed out to me at one point a trend of young Republicans running for office in 2022 or 2021. I hope it is a trend because we'd love to see more young people running for office. But the reality that so far has been that most of the people running for office are much older than that. That doesn't mean that we don't want them to win. So we're really going to be focused on just helping Republicans get over the finish line. So, for instance, school board elections. We've evaluated several candidates. We've identified 2 or 3 that are doing really well. I mean, they're doing stellar. They don't really need help. We're going to endorse them. We're going to talk about them. But they don't really need our help. Right? They've got everything covered. But then there's a handful of other candidates, still fantastic candidates in other school districts that don't have all that. They're not up to the same speed as some of the other candidates. So they might need more of a leg up. They might need more help. And that's why I think the beauty of being a PAC is it's not about which candidates come to ask us for our help. It's about which candidates do we think need help. And then when we make that decision as an organization, we can just go and help them. We don't need to ask for anybody's permission. We don't need to see if anybody's okay with it. We just go and help them. And we do it in whatever way we can based on what we have available. So if we have finances available, we would love to spend money to help some of these elections, especially with things like mailers. That's a huge deal to a lot of these small races. You know, if you could send out a mailer for a city council candidate, what's it going to cost you? $1,000? It's not a lot of money when you're talking about political spending, but it's a huge impact for these small races. So that's what we're looking at. I mean, granted, we started our fundraising effort to help school board candidates. We've only raised a few $100s. So, matter of fact, I'm going to be in Elyria or Grafton tonight to speak with the Elyria Republicans about this exact issue. So we do have some plans, and we're going to be trying to raise more money. But I would say that 2021 is going to be, we're going to do what we can with what we have. 2022 is more, we want to be taken seriously as a Republican organization. I can tell you our November meeting plan is we're going to recap the election, and we're going to begin the planning process to attempt to host a U.S. Senate debate for the GOP candidates prior to the primary.
Okay.
So we're going to be pushing that pretty hard. Several of us have made direct contacts with U.S. Senate candidates, you know, personal cell phone numbers, that kind of thing. We were going to reach out and try and pull everybody together at like a reasonable venue in Lorain County where we could have a real, actual live stream debate. And we were going to live stream the whole thing and invite the media. And so we're going to try and go the full 9 yards and set up a debate for these guys because we think that there isn't enough. I think there's one debate scheduled. It's not enough. You have 7 people in a primary for the United States Senate. You let them talk to each other one time? That seems absurd to me. So we're going to shoot for pre-primary debate, at least just one, and we're going to try and pull in all the major candidates to see if they'll be willing to have that conversation. And of course, we're going to ask the Republican questions, do the normal thing. But then after that, we've got a huge election. Massive. I mean, we've got a county commissioner's seat up, county auditor seat up. We've got a congressional candidate that's running really strong right now in J.R. Majewski up on the North Coast. And then we've also got our governor's race, all the statewide offices. So it's going to be all of that coming to fruition at one time. Now, we're going to be spending a lot of our time on the county races because we love Lorain County. That's where we are.
Right.
We're trying to make Lorain County red. So, but we can't necessarily do that if we're also not going to try and help the Senate candidate, if we're also not going to try and help people like JR, which I don't know if we will be or able to or not, but I can tell you right now, my vote's going to JR, and I think he's going to win his primary. So I think we're going to have a good slate. I mean, you've got Jim Jordan in part of the district, and you'll have JR in another part of the district, and Bob Gibbs and I think there's actually a young man primarying Bob Gibbs right now who's also a solid conservative. So we have nothing but good choices for our congressional seats this time around, which is excellent. Hopefully our Senate candidate is the same way, and I'm looking forward to it. We all are. I mean, Greg's excited because he wants to start the campaigning. He wants to get the season going, find out who wins the primaries so we can start putting out literature and talking to people. But yeah, that's it. But if you wanted to know the way we accomplish all that, the way we plan on financing all of these activities, it's generally the community. So that's what we are. We exist as a fundraising organization. So, I mean, I've spent some of my own personal money in the group. Greg has spent some of his own personal money. My wife has spent some of her personal money. And we've all kind of contributed a little bit up to this point. But we are also asking members of the community to contribute to the organization so that we can afford things like a venue for a U.S. Senate debate. Or so that we can, if we get, right now we have about 10 people that we can expect to show up to a meeting. If we were to do food or in a venue, we could probably get 15 to 20. To me, that's not enough people to put in front of some candidates. Some people, the crowd needs to be larger for them to have any value in their speaking opportunity. So right now, one of the things our membership committee is focused on, which is I think it's Alex and Nick, they're trying to figure out exactly what we want to do to try and attract more young people. I'm not that guy. So, but my job is to execute their will and to help plan the meetings and to help do all these facilitative things. Their job is to kind of figure out what exactly young people are looking for. So right now, we haven't had any candidates come speak yet, but we have had offers. I mean, State Representative Dick Stein has offered to speak for us. Senate candidate Bernie Moreno, I think Josh Mandel and Mike Gibbons have all said something about speaking to us. So there's a lot of interest in our new group, but we're still small and we're still kind of all business. So I know October, this meeting is coming up on the 20th. We're going to be trying to do a school board candidate meet and greet. We're going to invite all 8 of the Republican school board candidates to GOP HQ, put some snacks and drinks out, and invite the public in to come say hello to them.
Okay.
So we're going to start doing little things like that more often. You know, I got to stress again, we've only existed since May, and we've only really understood, you know, what we're really doing since July, which is just a few months ago. It's probably not going to be until next year that you start seeing larger crowds of younger people, or until the public starts to realize they're allowed to come to our events. So I'm doing this thing with you here today.
Okay.
Everybody's invited. So,
all right, good.
That's the point. Eventually, when we get more people showing up to those things, we're going to invite people like the U.S. Senate candidates and things like that. So, but we're just working towards it at a regular pace so that we can kind of figure things out as we go.
Okay. Are you having some fundraising events coming up?
Not any
Do you have
events.
anything scheduled yet?
We aren't doing any fundraising events. There was a potential thing we might have been involved in. It's a fundraiser at German's Villa. We decided not to go in with that. It was with other organizations as well. So we decided not to be involved in that at this time. But we are planning something for 2022. It's probably going to be after our debate.
Okay.
So the party does Lincoln Day every year. So we want to make sure it's at least distant from Lincoln Day, and I think Lincoln Day is going to be earlier in the year next year. So we're probably not going to have any major fundraising events until the summer or fall of next year. But we are going to have meetings, and we're going to be going to things. I mean, there's always one of us somewhere. You know, we try to make sure we plug somebody somewhere all the time.
Okay. Do you need volunteers? Can people volunteer? Do you have a
Yes.
website that?
So right now we mostly just use Facebook.
Okay.
And it's just the Lorain County Young Republicans, you know, on Facebook, and you'll be able to find us that way. Another fundraising option we have is we have a WinRed account. Since we're a Republican organization, we figured it was a good idea to apply for a fundraising account with the most notable Republican fundraising apparatus in the country. So we secured a WinRed account, and if folks go to WinRed's website, when you land there's a big map, and you click on the state of Ohio, and at the very bottom of the list, you'll see the Lorain County Young Republicans, and that's our donation link. That's how we raise money online. That's what I'm going to be kind of handing out to some folks in the near couple of days here. I'm going to Leary tonight. I'll be handing out that card, trying to raise some money. And then I've got some phone calls to make as well. So do some of the other folks in the organization. You know, we've got several of the younger guys they're affiliated with folks that can contribute funds to help our organization. And I think one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of the folks are looking for a reason. You know, why should we contribute to your organization? And it's a good question, because I would ask the same question. And if I had to give them an answer, I would say, because you need an organization in Lorain County that's actually committed to winning elections in Lorain County. And even though we have that, in a way, across our various clubs and our GOP apparatus, none of the clubs can spend more than $1,000. And the GOP apparatus is never going to do anything but write a check. So we don't really have, something's missing. And, you know, when you have Democrats in charge for 80 years and you take control and you find out that the people you elected to take control aren't exactly the people you elected, you start to understand that there might be more than a little bit of a problem. It might not just be that we're outnumbered. It might not just be that our voters aren't engaged. It might be more than that. There might be a deeper issue. I worked for the Rob Weber for Congress campaign for a few months in the 2020 election cycle. And when I was working with him, I learned something, and then because you have to do research, you have to do a lot of work. You look at how much money is raised in the district every election cycle to figure out kind of a rough estimation of what you're expected to be able to do. The 9th district in Ohio, the mistake on the lake right there, the big snake they got going on, it's one of the lowest fundraising districts in the entire state for Republicans. For Democrats too, but the Democrats don't need as much because it's Marcy Kaptur and she always has $600,000 in the bank. So with the Republicans, it's a lot more difficult. I mean, the amount of money Rob raised it wasn't. I mean, I would call it like a county commissioner's race. It was not anywhere near normal. And when you look at the guy that ran before him, Steve Krause, same thing. Look at Miller, same thing. They all, even the guys that run that have enough money to put into the race, don't raise almost anything, because it's almost like a dead zone. So we understand that. I understand that, and I've kind of imparted that wisdom onto the group. Like, hey, look, this isn't exactly greener pastures for Republicanism. We have some offices. That's about it. We're still outnumbered. We still don't have enough offices. The Democrats are still dominating county government, even though we have the commissioners board. So it's a challenge, and I think that you need something more, and that's what we are.
Okay.
So we decided to fill. I mean, me, Greg, Mike, and Jason, we all noticed a void. We all noticed that there's something that's not being done enough. There's something else that has to happen for this county to make the jump to being able to call itself a stronghold. I don't want to live in a purple county. I'm sorry. I mean, it might sound fun, but I don't want to live in a place where sometimes I'm dominated by tyrants and totalitarians, and sometimes I'm dominated by thieves, because that's what we have. It's either totalitarians or thieves. The entire state of Ohio we got voted the most corrupt state in the union, I think, because of that householder shenanigans. But I mean, I wasn't involved in that, but I was at close proximity to people who were involved in it when I was working in the campaign season. So I got to see some of the behind-the-scenes things about that, and there are several guys that never went to prison. So, and that's all on purpose. It's a game, and so I look at it like, listen, if we're not going to put ourselves out there, if we aren't going to be the ones that do the vetting, that do the campaigning, that do the conversationing, we can't trust whether or not these people are being honest anymore. You know, we got Republican politicians that we've elected to represent us here in Lorain County at the state level, the federal level, or different, pretty much all levels that don't do what they say they're going to do. And these are Republicans, so it does kind of bother me a little bit that we don't have any guardian at the gate to say, the old guard's job is supposed to be to prevent people from getting into positions of power that seek to abuse them. And I think they kind of fell asleep 20 years ago and never woke up. So that's kind of why we're here. The old guard is going to eventually change. We're the new guard. And when we end up being 50 and 60 years old and in charge of the Republican Party, we intend to operate it the way we're going to operate our young Republicans. So, which means seriousness, diligence, like integrity. We're going to pay attention. We're not just going to let things happen. You got to be involved. Either life happens to you or you change something. So you don't want life to happen to you. It's not a good situation.
Understand. Now, I think you've given us the reasons that, or the way you've prepared yourself to be an executive director. But could you talk to that a little bit? What prepared you to do the job that you're doing?
Well, to be honest, I didn't know what an executive director was at first. I had only seen a handful of them in action. And I was like, well, what do they even do? So we had to sit there and Google it real quick. And we looked it up, and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I did when I was running my small business. So it's half kind of what I did working for Rob for one of the months I was there.
Rob Weber.
Yes, sorry, Rob Weber. So I only worked for his campaign for a few months before I ended up leaving, but it was a crazy experience. I mean, it went from the guy who won the congressional primary, the guy on the ballot is running for Congress, calls me on my cell phone. That on its own was like like holy cow, like what's going on here? I didn't expect that. And then he asked me for help, and I was like, 100%, absolutely. So I started doing some research for him, and then we started having some weird communication issues with some of the other, not with Rob, but with some other people with volunteering with the campaign. And then so it just kind of, some things got lost in translation, and then I get a phone call a month later, and like, hey, do you want to come and like work with the campaign? And I was like, wait, I thought you guys didn't want to talk to me anymore. I haven't heard anything. So it was this big confusion thing. So I eventually got in working with him. They assigned me to be the political director. And I was going everywhere with him. I was in the strategy meetings. I was talking to the campaign manager every day. And then about a month later, I did a lot of work for him. They weren't doing any social media advertising. So I kind of just took some initiative and wrote a social media advertising plan, and I presented it to the campaign manager, and he thought it was fantastic, and so he presented it to Rob, and next thing you know, I was in charge of social media advertising for about a month. And then then there was another shakeup in staffing, and Rob kind of made me in charge of things, but only for about a month, because I had to get out of there because it was just too much. So, well, you know, our goals were a little bit different too. You know, some people, when they get into politics, they have a very particular, this is it. It's either this or bust. And some people, more realists, kind of look at it like, okay, well, there's either this or this option. And they try to make plans for no matter what goes on. And I'm one of those, you have one mission. You have one job, and that is it. You do one job, and that's it. So there was some conflict I couldn't resolve. But
well, it sounds like you gained a lot from that.
And exponentially. I mean, if Rob's listening, I want to thank him, because that opportunity to work at that level of a congressional campaign allowed me to see so much of what happens behind the scenes in politics. It allowed me to learn a lot about how a campaign is supposed to be run, what kind of activities you do to win elections, why you do them and when. All the strategy meetings I would have discussions with the former campaign manager, who, by the way, is the campaign strategist for Mike Gibbons right now. So it's the guy knows what he's doing. So I got to learn a little bit from him. I got to study under him a little bit, I should say. You could assume, but yeah, invaluable experience.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking part in the interview. I want to thank you all for watching. Please give us feedback on this show. If you would like to appear on the show, or you know some interesting people, please send us their contact information, and we'll go from there. Remember, seatbelts save lives.
The preceding program was presented to you by a community producer. The statements, views, and opinions expressed were not necessarily those of ALC TV or the City of Avon Lake.